networks. Now I will need to provision my first virtual machine in this network. So in the search bar, I'll type virtual, and this time I'll select virtual machine. Is everyone with me here?
Yep.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Now it says there is no virtual machine because we have not created one. So we'll create the virtual machine. We'll hit create. When you hit create, you get two options, virtual machine or start with the preset configuration. If you have, so typically in a production environment, you will have golden images, and using those golden images, you will provision virtual machines so that your virtual machine is already joined to your corporate domain. It has all these softwares like antivirus, patching, all these softwares pre-installed and all the applications pre-configured on it. That is known as golden image. So if you have a golden image, you can also use that golden image to provision this machine. But we'll select the first option, which is virtual machine. So when you select the first option, virtual machine, you reach to this window which says create a virtual machine. Is everyone on this window?
Yes, Raghu.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, if you look carefully, virtual machine has more tags. It has first tag, which is basic, then it has a disk tag, then it has networking, management, advanced, and tags plus review plus create. As I said, it will be common to all the resources. So let's see what all options are there on the basic tag. All right. So the first option is select the subscription. I've selected my subscription. The second option is resource group. I'll select the same resource group that I've created for this training. Then comes the virtual machine name. Now, guys, you need to be a bit careful about a couple of things when you provision a virtual machine. We have a separate topic on virtual machine that we will cover. But since all of these services are interrelated, I will be covering virtual machine today partially, and then we will get into the detail of virtual machine configuration, on day 4 when we reach there. So first thing is virtual machine name. Couple of things that you need to remember that you may not find on the documentation. If you are provisioning a Windows-based virtual machine, the name of the virtual machine should not exceed 15 characters, 15. Why? There's a reason for it. The reason is that inside virtual machine, I'm sorry?
Yeah, I was just saying NetBias. So you've just
NetBias, absolutely. So inside the virtual machine, when you add that virtual machine to a domain, it cannot exceed 15 characters. So that's the reason if you're provisioning a Windows-based virtual machine, you may need to make sure that you do not go over 15 characters. Azure will not stop you. See, I can type as many as characters. Azure is not stopping me. I need to know this. Otherwise, I will not be able to join my virtual machine to domain. And in order to join that, I will need to reduce the characters there. And what will happen? The name of the virtual machine on the portal, as well as inside the OS, will be different, which will create issues in future. So we are creating our first virtual machine. Azure has provided you naming strategy. Azure has a documentation which talks about nomenclature for all the services or resources that you create. I'll share the link for that nomenclature. Typically, in a production environment, what they do when they create a virtual machine, they use this nomenclature. So they start with the location of the virtual machine. That what is the location of the virtual machine? So location is East US. So in short, they type it US East, West US, US West, US W, US E. Then they put a hyphen to differentiate. Then they put the environment, that which environment does this virtual machine belong to. So the environment could be PRD, DEV, or QA. That's the environment. I'm just sharing the nomenclature that I primarily suggest to corporates who I work with or who I provide consulting services to. So US East, PRD, production, then the name of the application, which is installed on this virtual, which is installed on this virtual machine or which is going to be installed. So name of the applications. Now we already have taken 8 characters. We are left with 7 characters. So I'll take 3 characters for the application name, any 3 characters. Let's say it has SharePoint. So I will use SHR, which is SharePoint, or SHP, 3 characters. Then the remaining 4 characters I will use for the what tier of SharePoint it has. Does it does it have a web server? Does it have an application server? Or this virtual machine is going to host the database? So typically I'll write that. If it is has a web server, I'll put web. If it has if it will host application, I'll put app. If it hosts, if it is going to host databases, then I'll either put SQL. If it is Oracle, ORC, depending on the 3 letters for the database. Let's say it is going to host web services. So I'll put SHP web, which is SharePoint web, and then I'll use a numeral 1. Why? There could be, there could be multiple web servers when you are using high availability and load balancing. You will provision multiple web servers. How will you differentiate? So these numbers will differentiate. From 1 to 9, you can have 9 virtual machines having the same role. If you feel that I will have 20 virtual machines, then how will I do? If I do 11, I will exceed the limit. Then I'll say, you start with 1, you go till 9, and once you're done with 9, you start with ABCD. You start with alphabets. Then you will get 26 alphabets. So that way, you will not have a scenario wherein one application has 26 alphabets and 9 numerals, which is 35 instances of the same type. I have not seen an application in this entire world or throughout my career which has one tier that distributes across 35 VMs. Not possible. So SharePoint Web 1. That's the nomenclature that I typically follow. And if you count, these are 15 characters. Is it making sense, guys?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll use this name then. East US, there it says availability options. I talked about availability options in Azure. There are 3 options. I'm sorry, there are 2 options: availability sets and availability zone. Availability zone is not available everywhere because it requires more investments from Microsoft. It requires more than 2 data centers. But availability set is available. And these options, there is no price for it. So you should use these services to ensure high availability. So it says availability option. When you drop down, it says no infrastructure redundancy required, which means I don't need availability options, or availability zone, or availability set. If I select availability zone, then in the drop down, I will need to select. In East US, I have 3 availability zones. So what I can do, if I'm going to imagine this is a production deployment, I'm going to deploy production SharePoint environment in Azure, and I'm creating web servers for it. And I need at least 2 web servers for the high availability. I will provision my first web server in availability zone 1 and my second web server in availability zone 2. So even if my data center, which is hosting web server 1 goes down, the other data center will continue to run, and my application will remain connected and available to users. That's availability zone. Availability set means within the same data center, those 2 servers will be kept on a different rack, which has different update and fault domain. Now, availability set is available everywhere because it's within the data center. But availability zone is not available everywhere because it requires 2 data centers. And there could be a high probability that Microsoft does not have 2 data centers in all the regions, especially the regions which has recently been introduced. That's the reason this availability zone service is not available everywhere. But let's say this service is available in East US. So I'll select availability zone 1 here. Then comes the image. What image I want to provision on this virtual machine? So I'll select a Windows image from the drop down, which is, let's say, the latest image, Windows Server 2019. Now, virtual machines are of 2 types, generation 1 and generation 2. So I'll select generation 2 here. The operating system image is generation 2. Then comes Azure Spot instances. I'll talk about it later when we do virtual machines. Size. Size means what CPU and RAM configuration I need. Now, everyone, you are using Azure sponsorship or Azure free trial. Microsoft is giving you this offer so that you can explore all the services, not just focus on a specific service, which means Microsoft has put some restrictions on your account. You cannot use more than 10 CPU cores. So what you need to do, you need to be very careful when you select the size. Let's just identify a size which gives me one CPU core, because the limitation is at the core level, not at the memory level. So I'll select this size, which is standard DS1V2, which has one virtual CPU and 3.5 gigabyte of RAM. Please everyone select this size, which has one CPU. Okay, moving on. For this virtual machine, I need a username and password. I'll put my username and password. I typically use Azure user. And for password, I use admin at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Raghu, when you are changing the size, I think the image is automatically changing to the generation 1 instead of generation 2.
Absolutely. Because not all sizes supports all, all versions. So the moment you select a lower size, it will select generation 1. But that hardly makes any difference to you because we are not focusing on operating system right now. Okay. Okay. Then comes, so you have put the Azure username and password. Please remember this credential. While you type it, once you see a green check, also write it down on a piece of paper for future reference. You will need username and password to log into your virtual machine. Okay. Then comes inbound port rules. Now let's leave everything default. After you type username and password, please don't make any changes. Leave everything as default. However, at the licensing, where it says, remember I talked about Azure pricing calculator, I talked about Azure hybrid benefit, wherein if you have an existing license, you can actually get more saving. So if you check this box that says, would you like to use an existing Windows Server license? If you check this box, it takes an acknowledgement from you. It's all trust basis. The moment you acknowledge that, yes, I have an eligible Windows Server license, Microsoft will reduce the price of this VM. Right? Microsoft is not going to actually, validate this, but by virtue of your association, Microsoft will find out that you do not own a license, and that's where Microsoft will disable your subscription. So it's all trust based. Please do not cheat with Microsoft. So I will uncheck this box.
Raghu, I'm sorry to disturb you. So what is the password you kept? Because it is saying something 12 to 13 characters long for us.
Okay, so you can keep a password of your choice, which meets the password complexity requirements. I typically use this password, which is A capital, A in caps, admin at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. I use this one. Okay, so licensing we are done. We are done on the first tab, which is basics. Is everyone with me on this tab?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Let's move on to the next tab, which is disk. Now, when it comes to disk, it says OS disk type.
In ports, we have selected allow selected ports, right?
We have not changed anything there. Let it be default.
Okay.
Okay, let's move on to the next tab, which is disk. Now, on the disk tab, there are three options: low premium SSD, standard SSD, standard HDD. These are the three varieties of disk. As you already understand from the differentiation, HDD is hard disk drive, SSD is solid state drive. So this has low performance, this has medium performance, and premium has higher performance. In a production environment, you will provision premium SSD for all the production VMs. For non-production VMs, you can select one of these two options. Now, there's a huge significant cost difference also. So I will be using standard SSD for this training to reduce the cost, but to also get the good performance. Then comes encryption type. You can encrypt the virtual machine OS disk and all the data disk with Microsoft managed keys or your own keys. By default in Azure, all data that you keep, all virtual machine disk, or virtual machines that you provision, when you provision a virtual machine, by default, it provisions an OS disk in which OS files are kept. Microsoft will encrypt that data using its own managed keys for the security perspective. This is by default. But if you feel that you don't want Microsoft to encrypt it, you want to use your own encryption keys, then you can select the second option that says encryption at rest with customer managed key. When you select this option, it will say, okay, where is your encryption key? It will ask you other questions. So we'll not get into that. We'll use the default option that says, okay, Microsoft, you encrypt it. Then comes the data disk. If you want to attach data disk to this virtual machine, you will add it here. We are not doing this. We'll do this when we do virtual machine. Our ultimate goal is to provision a virtual machine real quick so that we can complete our networking topic. So we'll go to the next. Is everyone with me on this disk tab?
Yes.
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 Next tab is networking, wherein you will wherein you will define which network and subnet this virtual machine should reside in or should be hosted in. So the virtual network is by default selected. I'm saying in the drop down, you see all the virtual networks. I've got 2 virtual networks. So the first one is by default there. Then the subnet, app subnet is selected, and I have all my subnets here. If you look carefully, I do not have gateway subnet, but in your case, you will also see gateway subnet, but it will say you cannot choose this subnet because gateway is only dedicated for VPN devices. Did you notice that in your respective view?
Yes.
Yes, Raghu.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'll select my web subnet because I'm provisioning this VM in web subnet. Then it says public IP. I will not make any changes. Leave it as it is. I will only select network in subnet and leave everything as it is. I'll go to the next tab now, which is management tab. Here, I'm not making any change. Leave as it is. Then I'll go to the next tab, advanced. No changes. Leave as it is.
Raghu, sorry too. Can you come back to this management tab again? Yeah, this RDP 3389 we have to keep it right there in the networking tab.
In network tab, you will
Look
only
inbound ports. No.
network subnet. Rest of them will be as it is.
As it is. Okay. Got it. Yeah.
Management subnet, no change. Advanced subnet, no change. Tags, I will leave you the decision if you want to put tags.
No need.
Review plus create. I'm reviewing the configuration now. Okay, wait. So I've got my virtual machine validation passed. However, I have one warning from Azure. It says you have RDP ports open to the internet because we have done that by design.
Yes.
We need to connect to our virtual machine. We don't have a VPN, so this is by purpose. And our validation has passed. Now I'll create my virtual machine. I'll hit create.
Raghu, I have one question. Under disk, did we for encryption type? Did we select the customer managed key?
No, default.
Okay.
Please select default. Then on the next step, networking, please select your network and subnet, which is web subnet, and leave everything as it is. Management tab as it is, advanced tab as it is, tags as it is, review plus create, and then hit create. So our first virtual machine is getting created. Now, while this virtual machine is getting created, a couple of other resources are also getting created. Those resources are, so first of all, this virtual machine will get created. With this virtual machine, an OS disk will also be created. A network interface card will be created. A public IP will be created. These are the 3 additional resources that will get created along with this virtual machine. That's exactly what you will see here now. So see, this is the virtual machine. Okay, the deployment is completed. And if you see here, see, it has created a virtual machine. It has created a network interface. It has created a public IP address, and it has also created a network security proof. I'll talk about it later on. So with this virtual machine, it has created 4 additional resources. Now, these resources are created with this virtual machine, but These resources do not depend on this virtual machine. They are individual resources connected to this virtual machine. When you delete this virtual machine, these resources will still continue to remain there. And you will continue to pay the price for these resources. For example, you'll pay the price for disk. There is no price for NIC, but there is a price for public IP. There is no price for NSG. So even if you delete your virtual machine, you will continue to pay for storage and public IP. Now, this is where resource group will help you. If you have everything in the same resource group, you will just delete the resource group and you don't need to bother about other resources which are lying here and there. So always remember this. These are the additional resources that gets created when we create a virtual machine. So my first virtual machine is created. If I just click on the search and see, whenever I search for a service, you will always find it under recent services. You don't need to type it again and again. You can directly click from here. So if I go to my virtual machine blade, this is known as blade, service blade or resource blade. So when you go to the service blade for virtual machine, you will see your first virtual machine. And if you see, this is part of your subscription, your resource group, location, status, operating system, size, public IP, all of this information is here. Now, you want to see more information. You can change this view also. Over here on the top where it says manage view, you will click on it and you will click on edit columns. When you click edit columns, to your right, you will see all of these columns. You can add columns. For example, if within the same view, you want to see what is the private IP address of my virtual machine, you can just select it from the drop down private IP address. You want to see which network this virtual machine is created. From the drop down, you can select virtual network. You also want to see which subnet inside the network this virtual machine is created. Again, add one column and select the subnet and save it. And you will see the other information, private IP, public IP, virtual network, subnet. So that way you can modify your view as per your requirements. Is it clear to everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's move on. Now,
Yeah,
we have our
address is,
yeah.
and I think address is 192.168.1.4. I mean, four IP addresses it left out, right? Initial 4 IP addresses.
It will always do that, and that's exactly what we discussed. That it will serve first 4 and last IP.
Yeah.
So by default, it will go sequential. When you provision the next virtual machine in the same subnet, that will be given 5, next 6, 7, so forth and so on. Azure follows that sequential method. Now my first virtual machine is is up and running here. I will need to create one more virtual machine in the other network that I have created for the purpose of my second lab. Let's provision another virtual machine. So I'm on the virtual machine blade. I'll click on create once again. That will take me to create a virtual machine page once again. I'll select my, now is the first virtual machine created for everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Let's
Yes.
create other virtual machine with the same settings. Name. We can select US East, PRD, SHP, which is SharePoint. And this time we can say it's Web 2, right? Then in the availability zone, we can select 2. The operating system will remain the same. The size will remain the same, 1 CPU and 3 GB RAM, 3.5. Provide username and password.
Can you go up once?
All right, so once you are done with username and password, and by selecting all of these options, the rest of the options will remain as it is, no changes. Then you go to the disk tab, same option. You will select standard SSD instead of premium to save some money. Encryption will remain as it is, default. No changes on this tab other than selecting the OS disk type, which is standard SSD. You move to the networking tab. This is critical, guys. On this tab, now you will select your other network, the second virtual network. So I'm selecting my second virtual network, which is Raghuveer VNet 2, and I'll select the web subnet in that virtual network also. You can select app subnet, there is no restriction. But I'm just keeping my, my design consistent. So I'll select the web subnet and then nothing else, everything as it is. Only the virtual network and subnet you need to select on the networking tab. Management tab,
We can change it later on as well, no?
no.
Okay, so this is one time only.
Yeah, you need to be careful by taking virtual network and subnet.
Okay.
Okay, so virtual network and subnet. Management tab, no changes. Advanced tab, no changes. Tags, only if you wish to. Review plus create. It's validating the configuration. The price is same. And I'll hit create. So I'm creating my second virtual machine in the other network. And once that virtual machine is created, if you look at the slide, this will be the design. So you have two virtual networks. In each virtual network, you have one virtual machine in the web subnet. That will be the design that we want to provision.
Raghu, where can we see the username and password for this? Once we create this VM, where can we see this username password?
You cannot see it. That's the reason I said that you need to remember it.
Yeah, I'm just asking. I remember that, but just asking.
No,
What if someone forgets that?
that I will talk about later. But right now, you're not supposed to be forgetting anything. Please write it down on a piece of paper. All right, let me know once the second virtual machine is up and running for everyone.
It's in progress.
Yeah.
Okay.
Progress. Yeah, deployment complete.
Yeah, I'm complete.
All right, it is also complete for me. Let's go to the virtual machine blade once again. And it still says creating. I'll just do a refresh and it's running. So both the virtual machines are up and running. However, they are part of separate network that I can validate from here. And in those network, they are provisioned in web subnet. That's exactly what shown in this PPT. That's the design. However, I see this red cross. Now, what does this red cross means? This basically means that they are, though both the network belongs to your subscription and you are the account admin for the subscription, even though Virtual network has its own properties, own capabilities, which is isolation, which means these two networks are running in isolation with each other. It also means that these two virtual machines cannot communicate with each other. There is no communication. However, if you create one more virtual machine in the same network, in the same subnet or in the other subnet, that will work. So within the virtual network, all the virtual machines can communicate, securely communicate with one another, no restriction. Here also, here also. But across the virtual network, they cannot communicate. In order for them to communicate, you need to connect those two virtual network, and connecting two virtual network means peering the virtual network. But let's just not trust my statement. Let's validate it for yourself. So let's connect to our first virtual machine. So we'll go back to the portal. We'll click on our first virtual machine, which takes me to the virtual machine overview blade. Now, in order to connect to this virtual machine, I have two options. Either I can, on the overview page, when you hit connect, it gives you three options: RDP, SSH, Bastion. Since this is a Windows virtual machine, I'll select RDP. And then I can just download this file, RDP file. That's first option to connect to this virtual machine. The second option is this virtual machine has a public IP. I'll just copy that public IP. I can find it here under properties, networking tab. Here's the public IP. I'll just copy this public IP of the virtual machine from here. Here, right next to public IP, you will see this copy to clipboard. So I'll copy the public IP and I'll open remote desktop window, which is MSTSC. This remote desktop connection window. You can bring up this window by opening the run box and type MSTSC, or you can directly type in the search remote desktop connection. You open this window and you copy the public IP address here. I mean, you paste the public IP address here and hit connect. This is the another method. When you hit connect, it will ask you for the virtual machine ID and password, username and password. Now, people who are using their corporate laptop, they will find there by default their corporate ID or corporate domain listed. So in order to avoid that, what you need to do, you can put dot, which is full stop, and backslash, and then type your username and password. When you do this, by default, that domain is gone. So you can type like this. Since my system is not a corporate one, I'll type directly my Azure user. I'm saying the username for the machine and password. Okay, I did a mistake.
It's directly taking my Azure account.
If it is taking, well and good. And here I got this prompt.
No, I mean, it's taking my Microsoft account.
You can
Should
provide.
be.
No, you need to provide the username and password for the virtual machine.
Yep.
I'm connected to my virtual machine.
Yeah, even I am able to connect.
You are unable or able?
I am able to connect. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So since I'm logging in to this virtual machine for the first time, it's just doing verification.
Yeah, Raghu, I am connected now.
Okay. Let everyone connect.
Raghu, you'll have to show the steps again, right? The first one, the RDP one, and the other one you did through the remote desktop. That was a bit, yeah.
So over here, it says connect. You can click on RDP and you can download this RDP file. Let's say I'm downloading it on the desktop. I see it at the bottom, and then you double click on this file. When you double click on this file, it will directly ask you the credentials. When you double click on this file, you will see this page. Just check the box, do not ask me again, and hit connect. When you do that, it will directly ask you for the password. Why? because when you download the RDP file, it will already know the username, but it will ask you for the password to validate that you are the authentic person. So it will ask you for the password. That's the first option. The second option is you go to the overview page once again, you copy the public IP address, open the remote desktop window. Now, how do you open the remote desktop window? Either you, at the start, at the bottom, you can type remote. The moment you type remote, it will say remote desktop connection. Click on it. It will open this box. Paste the public IP of the VM in the computer on this box and hit connect. It will also give you the connection prompt. They are the two methods to connect to your Azure VM. Since I'm already connected, I will not type it again. So once you're connected to your VM, since this is a Windows Server operating system, this is not typical client OS. You will find some changes in the UI. It comes with Server Manager by default. You can close Server Manager, and here you have your main screen, which has recycle bin on it. So this is how you connect to an Azure virtual machine, or you take a remote desktop of an Azure virtual machine. Let me know when everyone is able to do this.